So it is with great pleasure, but like particularly personal pleasure, that I introduce Julian Guthrie and Dan Cray. So they're going to talk about how to make a spaceship. So this, it comes from a book that Julian wrote, which my son and I read. So I got it for my 11-year-old son as a Christmas present last year. I bought him this book that I thought he would really enjoy. We then went to the Hiller Aviation Museum, which is in San Carlos, so just about 20, 30 miles south of here, to which we are members. And Julian was there doing a book signing with the guy who piloted the second SpaceShipOne, which you'll hear about. That was a fantastic book signing. She was a great speaker. We ended up getting connected after that, and now here she and Dan Cray are. So Julian is an award-winning journalist. So she worked many years at the San Francisco Chronicle. She is the author of How to Make a Spaceship. She is also the author of a book called The Billionaire and the Mechanic, which is about Larry Ellison's quest for the America's Cup. She is currently working on a book that is going to be near and dear to all of our hearts called Alpha Girls, coming out in 2019, which is about women in Silicon Valley and the struggles they've gone through and the great achievements that they have made. That one has already been optioned for TV and movie rights, and then recently How to Make a Spaceship, which you will hear about today, was optioned for TV series. So that's pretty cool. Dan Cray is the engineer's engineer. So he is a structural engineer. He helped make sure the SpaceShipOne you're going to hear about actually was space-worthy and air-worthy, because it had to be both. He was particularly instrumental in making sure this really goofy and amazing feather design, which you will hear about, actually was a flyable thing. He has checked out and been a structural analyst on more aircraft than probably anybody else in the world. Because he works for Scaled Composites, that's Burt Rutan's company, they continue to build at least once a year a new airframe, a new aircraft from scratch, and Dan's the guy that figures out whether this thing is actually going to fly. So please welcome Julian Guthrie and Dan Cray.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that great introduction. It's fantastic to be here. And I appreciate, again, the invitation. So you may think, what does having to make a spaceship have to do with what you all are doing? Well, it's really something that's very similar, and that is architecting, designing the future that you want. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I wrote this, this book that was about 340 pages. And I have, for your sake, I have winnowed it down to kind of 5 key takeaways that I hope will inspire you here at the conference and going forward with your own moonshots, with your own crazy dreams, with whatever it is that you are trying to succeed at that may be really difficult. So the first is follow your passion. And this one gets very, very important as the story goes on here. If we can get the clicker to work. Just, there we go. I don't know if I have to get closer here. Okay, it's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me. So the reason why, now we're clicking ahead, the reason why this is so important is because there are a lot of people in your life, and this may speak to especially the Sebastians in the room, the young people in the room, but to all of us, where there are others who have an idea for what you should do or what you should be. And this is a story about finding your passion. So the story starts with this boy named Peter Diamandis, who was the child of Greek immigrants, and his family came to America, struggled. His father became a doctor, and it was expected that this son of Greek immigrants follow in the father's path. And here he is as a little boy, Peter Diamandis, with his toy medical kit, checking his mother's pulse. And when people met him, they said, hello, future Dr. Diamandis. So he was really on this path. But he loved science. He loved tinkering. He loved to make things. He was not as interested in medicine. And this is really a key thing. So between the photo that you just saw and this photo, something really important happened. It was July 1969. Peter Diamandis was 8 years old when he got to stay up late. His parents let him stay up late, and he watched the landing of Apollo 11 on the moon. And he was this little wide-eyed boy who was completely transfixed as he watched man set foot on another celestial body for the first time. And so he sets out, that really set him out on this entrepreneurial kind of adventure story where he so wanted to become an astronaut. And here you see him in this picture. He's a rocket boy. He's tinkering, he's building, he's testing out all sorts of chemicals. He and his buddies were hoarding explosives in their bedrooms. Don't try this at home. And dividing up the stash so that if one stash were discovered, the other would be safe. Starting with Estes rockets and making motors of all kinds and rockets. So remember this, we're going to come back to him. I want to introduce you. The next kind of takeaway is take big chances, which is a key theme in this story all along. If you can dream it, you can do it. Walt Disney. So next we're going to introduce you to a key person who Randy referenced, and that is a fellow named Burt Rutan. And here he is. So you met Peter, you saw Peter when he was a little boy, and you see that he has this love of space and love of rocketry. This is Burt Rutan when he's a little boy, and his love is always planes, always aviation. He's this kid who there is no way if a plane is flying overhead that he could not look up, that he has to study that plane and dream of planes. And it was just in his marrow in the same way rocketry was for Peter Diamandis. So by the time he's a teenager, he's building these very impressive national award-winning model planes. And it's interesting because this is true to Burt throughout his career, and that is he never wanted to build anything from a kit. He always wanted to build something of his own design. His brother, Dick Rutan, who you'll hear more about later and who goes on to become a very famous pilot and a decorated military pilot. So Dick Rutan, the older brother, would build and fly these model planes from kits and crash them, and the younger brother, Burt, would pick up the balsa wood pieces and build something of his own design. Again, he didn't want to make something that someone else had already built. So here he is, looking a lot like Elvis, if you can see him in this plane. He starts making these kits so that you can build a plane basically in your own garage. And this was called the Varavigan, kind of cool delta wing there. And Burt is flying it. I love that picture. So he's making, again, planes of his own design and very improbable flying machines. And I took a picture of this when I was in the Mojave Desert. This was Burt's old drafting table, which I thought was pretty amazing. Now this is when Burt Rutan became famous. And this was the start. This was the taking big chances embodied. This is a plane called the Voyager, flown by his brother, Dick Rutan. They set out to do what others said was impossible, and that is build and fly an airplane that can fly nonstop, non-refueled around the globe. And they succeeded. 1986, this lands Edwards Air Force Base. They're on the cover of every magazine across the globe. Small team, doing very big things, which is going to be another takeaway here. Beautiful plane, improbable looking plane, basically a flying gas tank. I think they had something like 17 gas tanks in the wings, all the way down the wings, so super innovative. Next takeaway, small teams do big things, and I think this probably applies to all of you and what you are doing here and trying to do, and I'm sure succeeding in doing. So I love this quote, very highbrow. Where we're going, we don't need roads, Back to the Future. And that's true, that's all about innovating, and that's all about making things of your own design, and not making things out of a kit. as Burt Rutan has done very successfully. So now we're back to Peter Diamandis. And here's this quintessential space geek who does everything he wants to just to become a part of the astronaut corps, but still trying to please his parents. He goes to MIT, he goes to Harvard, he gets his medical degree to please his parents, but he has no intention of ever practicing medicine. Here he is getting his degree. He also thinks secretly, and this shows how badly he wanted to get to space. He thought, maybe if I go to Harvard, it will advance my chances of getting into the astronaut corps, and maybe I can glean some details so I can live really long that will eventually allow me to get to space. So he goes to MIT, he goes to Harvard, he gets an aerospace degree, he gets a medical degree, but at this point, once he gets out with this six-pack of degrees, he is sure that space is his mission. He has founded a national student space club. He has founded an international space university. He has started a rocket company while he's at Harvard. He's clearly an underachiever. Here he's meeting Arthur C. Clarke, the scientist and science fiction writer. And I like his feathered hairdo. You'll see some pictures here. So here, at this time, this was the early 1990s, and the space shuttle, to many space dreamers, aficionados, the space shuttle was flying, but it was over budget and it was under delivering. And Peter is starting to think there is no way he's going to get to space, and he needs to somehow come up with another way to get to space. He doesn't think he's going to get into the astronaut corps. Even if he does, his chances of flying are so slim. So he meets with this team of space geeks and rocket scientists in Montrose. And I love the whiteboard. It says small teams can do big things. And he's writing, all these propulsion aspects, and he's in his element. So this is 1993. So he has his aha moment in an unlikely place, or maybe, as the writer should say, in a very likely place. He finds his aha moment in the pages of a book, a great book. He's at his parents' home, December 1993, Christmas time. He reads The Spirit of St. Louis by the great aviator Charles Lindbergh. And he had always thought that the young airmail pilot, Charles Lindbergh, flew as a stunt to get from New York to Paris. He's reading this and he's scribbling in the pages, and he realizes that Lindbergh flew not as a stunt, but to win a $25,000 prize put up by a French hotelier named Raymond Ortegue. And so when Lindbergh lands in Paris in 1927, he arguably becomes the most famous man on Earth, but more importantly, he really jumpstarts the commercial airline industry. And Peter thinks, oh my God, what if I could do the same thing that Ortegue did through Lindbergh, through an incentive competition for commercial space? And what if I could jumpstart an industry again that did not exist at this time? So in 1996, in St. Louis, which is where Charles Lindbergh found his backers, Peter Diamandis is on stage. He announces a $10 million prize for the first team that can build and fly a manned rocket to the start of space twice within 2 weeks. And start of space is 62 miles, 100 kilometers, and the von Karman line, an internationally accepted start of space. So he announces this. He's got astronauts on stage with him. He has Buzz Aldrin. You can see the famous mutton chop sideburns. Burt Rutan is there. And that's the start. This is the start of the race. He announces this prize. And again, the key thing is private companies, non-governmental. And at this time, only the world's 3 largest governments, China, the US, and the then Soviet Union, had managed to get man and machine to space and back. So this was an impossibility in many people's minds. The incentive competition was, again, launched, $10 million. Experts are clueless. Don't listen to the naysayers. Experts, I should have put, are sometimes clueless. Don't listen to the naysayers. But a good thing that's definitely key to this story, and so I love this part of it. So once this is launched, so success is being able to move from one failure to the next with enthusiasm, said Winston Churchill. So who do you get when you announce this $10 million prize, an incentive competition? And this is something great that can be utilized in different ways by many different types of companies today. So you get this maverick who's living in the Mojave Desert in an octagonal house, bermed house of his own design. You get a guy who has for his mailbox the tail section of an airplane. Conventional, right? You get Burt Rutan, there he is behind his computer, who is intrigued by this, has always loved space. You also get these other great characters, Steve Bennett, who's in the UK, who drops out of his job in the Colgate toothpaste factory and sacrifices everything. You get Dumitru Popescu, who's in Romania, who drops out of engineering school and risks everything, builds a rocket in the back, his father-in-law's backyard in Bucharest. Amazing story. You get these off-the-grid types. You get these think different types when you launch this sort of competition. You get Pablo de Leon down in Brazil. You get a guy who will probably look very familiar to all of you, a fellow named John Carmack, who launches Armadillo Aerospace, thinks that he can take what he's learned in programming for video games, famous Quake and Doom, and apply it to rocket science. Can he do that? So they're all in the quest to win this $10 million prize, and more importantly, to create a private path to space that just did not exist. So here we have, I'm going to move forward. You saw that briefly, if you didn't blink, the inside the cockpit of SpaceShipOne. Here's the feather mechanism, which Dan will talk about, as he's going to tell amazing stories from the inside and building this. But this was Burt Rutan's aha moment. We talked about Peter's. This was Burt's. So I'm going to try to move quickly here. Another key takeaway is to persist. So as I'm going to move forward here. So as these teams are madly building these crazy contraptions and flying machines, you have Peter Diamandis, key point. He launches the $10 million prize, remember, in St. Louis, and $10 million for the first team that can build and fly a manned rocket to the start of space. Minor detail, he didn't have the $10 million when he announced this. Very bold. So he goes on this, as people are building, these rockets, he is knocking on doors. He's told no 150 times. Why isn't NASA doing this? What if someone dies? Risk averse. There's Elon Musk on the left side in the baseball cap. He talks to Elon. He talks to Jeff Bezos. He talks to Richard Branson. Finally, he finds someone who is willing to take the risk. I love it that it happens to be a woman. This is Anusha Ansari. She is an engineer. She had had a very successful exit with her own company. This is Anusha. When she's growing up, she was a dreamer of space, a lover of space. She told me a fun story about when she would sleep out on her grandmother's patio in Tehran, and she would pray every night to the aliens, please, please take me away. This is a true story. So we'll come back to her. So, okay, the day has come. I'm flashing forward here. The building, the spaceships are being built in the Mojave Desert. Burt Rutan and his team, including Dan here, they have their spaceship ready. They've built the mothership. They've built the motor, the hybrid motor. They've built the rocket. Their test pilots are straight out of the right stuff. Tens of thousands of people descend on the Mojave Desert for the first flight to space and then 2 X-Prize flights. So here you have people coming in, and this was, they hoped, history in the making. This beautiful SpaceShipOne, the mothership, the White Knight, coming out, being pushed out of the hangar in the dark of night. Morning, very early morning in the Mojave Desert, everything on the line. Here it is in that beautiful morning light, taking flight. Will it work or not? Will they succeed? Every flight was full of anomalies. The pilots risking Their lives, their stories are incredible. Here is Richard Branson looking up, watching this. Next up, I think we're going to see another famous figure who started this whole captivating adventure for Peter Diamandis, Buzz Aldrin, who happens to be next to the woman in the sunglasses, is the wife of test pilot, and that's a very special woman there. Here's Peter Diamandis with his father. Everything on the line, watching this. Peter Diamandis, his father obviously finally realizes his son is not going to be a doctor. In this moment, though, all of these dreams. So here you have SpaceShipOne drop launched, going faster than a speeding bullet, 3,000 feet per second, almost straight up, the pilot white knuckling it there. Thousands of people on the Mojave Desert floor below, all the media there. What a spectacle it was on this beautiful day. So there is victory. There is 10 years, 8 years in the works. There are dreams that have been on the line. There is the impossible that was suddenly made possible after 10 years of hard work, of course. Anusha Ansari, and you have the whole team. You have, oh, I forgot to mention, there was a secret backer. He stayed secret for some time of the Scaled Composite SpaceShipOne program, and that was Paul Allen. You can see him in the cap behind Burt Rutan. And here's Peter, the quintessential space geek, with Burt Rutan in that moment after victory was made. So dream big, change the world, which is what this story is about, and I was so proud that I got to tell it. This is a great line by Burt Rutan. The day before something is a breakthrough, it is a crazy idea. So remember that. If someone tells you it's a crazy idea, it's probably full of promise, and it's probably something you should be pursuing. I'm just going to wrap up here so I don't cut more into Dan's time. So here you have this team, small teams doing big things, building the world's first private spaceship. Pretty amazing. This girl who dreamed of space went on to become the world's first private female space explorer, spent 10 days at the International Space Station. John Carmack there. I love that picture. He's the CTO of Oculus Rift. He's still working on rocketry, and the rocket boy himself made history with this dream, he said. Today, SpaceShipOne hangs in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, the gallery of flight, Milestones of Flight gallery in the Smithsonian, and you see it's hanging right next to the Spirit of St. Louis. Thank you very much. I hope you take this talk and you find your own innovations, your own ways to innovate, to do great things in small teams. Thank you very much. Dan, come on up.
All right, SpaceShipOne. Last time SpaceShipOne flew was almost 14 years ago, but the story behind SpaceShipOne is timeless.
Let me fly in space. Let me fly in space. Let me see that black sky.
Good, all set. Copy that. Fire switch coming. Mark.
On June 21st, 2004,
10 seconds.
a privately made rocket plane launched into history.
Left tunnel.
Its mission? To become the world's first commercial manned space vehicle.
This is not good.
If successful,
Very rough ride initially.
the flight of SpaceShipOne will open a new era of space exploration.
Wow, you would not believe the view.
Moving forward to see that black sky.
So how many here have seen the documentary Black Sky? Few? Okay, all right. The movie, it was pretty dramatic, and it was almost like it was over-dramatized, but no, it was that stressful. It was a crazy program. And by the way, I'm in awe of you guys. You guys live in a different world than I do. I'm a mechanical engineer and aero engineer, so you guys amaze me. How many people have seen SpaceShipOne in the Smithsonian or came out to the high desert to see it fly? Cool, all right. That was a crazy time when the little town of Mojave tripled by the population by three times. You know, it was like interesting time. So, SpaceShipOne, first non-government manned spaceship to make 2 suborbital flights to space within 2 weeks, going on to win the Ansari X-Prize that Julian just talked about. Oops. And built and flown in less than 3 years by a few dozen people. And for 14 years, I've asked, how is that possible? That was such an amazing program. And the simplest answer is just, in my opinion, the incredible leadership of SpaceShipOne designer Burt Rutan is what made the program successful. Up to that point, since 1972, Burt's companies had developed over 40 manned different aircraft types. The graph is altitude versus airspeed. So this is what we're kind of used to. That airplane that I put in the upper right corner, that's Proteus, that's still being operated today by Scale Composites. It's about 4,000 hours on it. It's quite a striking airplane, able to go over 60,000 feet. So then Burt comes to us and says, we're going to build a spaceship. And so the cluster of points in the lower left corner there, that's the performance that you just saw. It's the same graph, altitude versus airspeed. And, you know, we're wondering what makes him think that we have the capability to build a spaceship that goes over 3 times the speed of sound in over 300,000 feet, space. We pretty much figured Burt had lost it at that point. I like the David Copperfield kind of. But Burt, he confidently laid out detailed steps for what he thought would be a success, and eventually won us over. Keep it simple. Well, how do you keep a spaceship simple? I mean, it sounds like spaceships seem like they would be inherently complex, but no, there's no cabin heat or cooling for the pilot, which it sounds like ridiculous, but the flight from when it's dropped from the mothership to when it goes up and comes back, it's only 5.5 minutes. It's not that long. I emailed Burt actually last night, and Matt Simons, the head engineer, just to confirm that was true, because it's amazing to me. There's no, and the pilots wore lots of layers of socks and clothes, I guess. So no cabin heat or cooling for the pilot. Small round windows minimizing structural stress and weight. Maybe not pilot stress, but made my job easier. No pressure regulators for the reaction control thrusters. No active stability augmentation. SpaceShipOne's all hand flown. There's no augmentation at all. No throttle. It's either on or off. You know what I say? Yep. Again, sacrificing pilot comfort. No front wheel. You're only landing. You're not taking off. Yeah, that's Burt. I tell you, No propellant pumps. It's a pressure-fed system. No real thermal protection. That we say we did, but not really. No separate pressure in tank. The nitrous is actually pressurized itself at about 700 psi. There's only one rocket motor control valve. So in other words, only one moving part. And no in-flight gear retraction method. It's just like the space shuttle. It's a one-way gear. It just comes down. That's all you need to do. And there's one more in there. Yeah, rocket motor assembly was just glued to the fuselage with silicone. Seriously, it's just like bonded. The fuselage walls are just bonded to the rocket motor. So this is kind of a cool cutaway because it kind of shows how the rocket motor arrangement is. So it's the big ball there is the nitrous oxide tank. It's a hybrid rocket motor, so half liquid, half is solid. So the solid grain is the tube in the back that's cantilevered off the back of the pressure intake. The rubber is the fuel. So the valve's in between the two. So the way the whole combustion process starts is there's a valve that opens up, spills nitrous down through the fuel, which is the rubber-lined tube, and there's like little fireworks, sparkler things that kind of get the whole thing hot and the combustion process going. One of the cool things about SpaceShipOne, though, is it has to fly subsonically, supersonically, and in space. So it requires 3 different kind of control systems. So subsonically, that's what all those push rods that you see in there, they go to the control stick. So it's just like your Cessna down at the local airport. But once you go supersonically, those don't work. So now there's electric actuators on the outboard tails and on the bottom part of the verticals that control it supersonically. But once you're in space, those don't work because there's no air. So now there's little like reaction control thrusters that are on the nose and on the wingtips that can control attitude, and that's just like a blow down. They're cold gas thrusters from it's like a scuba bottle with 6,000 psi. It's not too much. So these are the basic steps that Burt laid out that kind of won us over, that maybe we could actually do this. And this was the turning point for me. I've been with the company for about 13 years at that point, and I've seen a lot of structure, but I couldn't. So the first step, which is really critical, is build the mothership as identical to the SpaceShipOne as possible. And that was genius. So it's no coincidence that the cockpit of the mothership looks just like the spaceship, because it's from the same tools, it's the same material, same windows, same everything. As many of the systems were replicated between the mothership and the spaceship, the navigation, the pressurization. Matter of fact, we'll talk about the feather shortly, but the pneumatics that raise and lower the feather are the same that lower the landing gear on the mothership. So every time they fly the mothership, they get to exercise all that structure and systems that are in the spaceship. So it can quickly identify any problems early. Plus, the pilots can fly the mothership as much as they want and simulate the same landing profiles and get used to the cockpit environment. It's just a brilliant way to get comfortable with the spaceship. Of course, next step, build a spaceship. And then after that, it was mostly just test flying. It makes sense, of course, to carry the spaceship on the mothership and see how the two interact, and then drop test the spaceship. It's a lightweight glider. There's no propellant on board, so then the pilots can evaluate how it flies on the glide. It's just a very incremental, test plan that was laid out. That just I get it. I can see this happening. It's just amazing. Drop test and exercise the feather. Briefly, the feather is what kind of folds the SpaceShipOne in half. We'll talk more about it. But it's a very unique feature on the SpaceShipOne. Fill the nitrous tank and just release it. It's sort of there is some thrust, but not a whole lot of thrust, but it exercises the whole rocket motor system. Fire the rocket motor for a short duration burn. It's just, all these make sense. Fire the rocket motor to get high enough for a supersonic reentry with the feather. That was kind of unknown. Again, the feather folds SpaceShipOne in half. We'll talk about it. First full rocket flight to space, and then now we're ready for the Ansari X-Prize. Just 2 more flights and we're done. Almost that easy. So, this is kind of fun graphics. These went on the side of the mothership to record each one of the SpaceShipOne flights. So the first 2 are just the captive carry. It wasn't until we got to flight 11 that we actually fired the rocket motor. And Brian Binney's the first guy to step up and take the rocket motor flight. He'll forever be my hero, to be the first guy to hit the rocket fire button. I put this picture up because anybody know the significance of the N number, 328 Kilo Foxtrot?
On Carmen line is 328,000 feet above sea level, which also translates into 328 kilograms.
I'm impressed. Future aeronautical engineer down here knows what it's 328,000 feet. So the third from the last flight, the altitudes of each one of the flights is put above the airplane. So the third of the last flight, 328,000 feet. So when that was the first time we went to space, Mike Melville took that flight, and Hyland was in the control room, and they're watching the altitude, and it just barely got to 328,000 feet. Actually, 328,000 feet, like 490, I think. So just barely over what was defined as space. So there's a matrix where every pound that the SpaceShipOne is overweight by, it cuts off like 129 feet in altitude. So after SpaceShipOne landed, Burt goes over to Mike and says, well, good thing you had a light breakfast this morning. So anyway, here's the breakthrough. Burt was really very concerned about safely re-entering from space. And one day, it came to him that if he folds the airplane in half, that could do a couple things for him. It creates a very stable configuration where it can passively just orient itself for re-entry. The space shuttle and X-15 in the 60s had to carefully re-enter space at a certain pitch attitude, otherwise it breaks apart. Matter of fact, one of the X-15s did break apart because it entered at a kittywampus angle coming back into the atmosphere. So Burt was very concerned about that, so he came up with the feather. so you can be re-entering upside down, sideways. It doesn't matter. It'll just naturally right itself. And the second thing that's really important is that it provides a lot of drag, because you need to start decelerating as quickly as possible as you start coming back in. So it's a very active, simple and safe, and no active control required. This is the basic profile. Once you drop from the mothership, the acceleration, the boost is only a little over a minute, 3.5 minutes in weightlessness. The coming back in is about a minute. The max deceleration is, well, it's 5.5 Gs deceleration coming back in, but only 16 seconds over 4 Gs. So it's not that bad, really. Well, relatively. If you're a fighter pilot, it's not that bad. So anyway, okay. So as we're getting closer and closer to actually flying this spaceship that folds in half, these guys are the bravest guys in the world to me. Are test pilots: Doug Shane, Mike Millville, Pete Sibold, Brian Binney. I think the world of them. You don't want to tell them. You don't want to call them scared, but they were curious. So I could sense the tension. So I went home, built I'm really a modeler. I love modeling. So I built a model of the SpaceShipOne that could do a full feather. Here's the feather. And recovery. Victory roll. So the next day I took it into scale and walked past Burt's office and said, "Hey, Burt, you might want to take a look at this. I'm going to fly it on the ramp." Burt says, "Come back here. Let me look at it." He says, "It's too flimsy. It's not going to fly." I said, "Well, it flew okay yesterday." So we go onto the ramp. I put it up. He launches it for me. Do the full feather, land. And Burt, he got so excited. He runs over, shakes my hand, and he says, "Wait right here. I'm going to have all the test pilots lined up so they can watch." And it was like, see, I told you it would work. Interesting also, there was a university aero professor that contacted Burt that thought his feather design was a bad idea, to go into a fatal spin and break apart. And Burt just answered her with, "Well, we've already done subscale RC model testing and it works just fine," which is this. But there was a genuine concern about supersonic reentry, and that was we studied that with CFD. There's no wind tunnel model ever done with SpaceShipOne. It was all CFD or model testing. So, Burt's management style is pretty interesting, in that he was able to just paint this reality that he kind of laid out in front of us, and we just got seduced by it, and you just kind of fall into it, and you get so excited and passionate, and you're a believer. I don't know how he cast that spell. But I've been, it's an amazing, a lot of it is, he gives people autonomy, people that he trusts and he also trusts if you have questions, you'll come back to him and ask certain questions, But it's an interesting management style he has. He always had to show 100% confidence. And he had to, especially to the test pilots. But I've never seen anybody work harder than him, too. One of the questions I had, though, I said, "Burt, I've worked on lots of composite structure, but not one with a rocket motor back here that's rumbling, and I don't know what it's going to do to the airframe." And Burt says, "Well, it's suspended in silicone, it'll damp out, and once you're in space, the acoustics don't, whatever." But at least he knew my concern. This is a cool picture. Paul Allen and Burt Rutan in the back. Mike Millville on top, the second to the last Ansari X-Prize. And I guess Julian and I like the same slide in the milestones of gallery with the Smithsonian next to the X1. One of the things I wanted to say real quick, though, is that was 14 years ago. Been a while. And Burt made a big point about trying to inspire kids at that time. Whenever whenever Spaceship One was on public display, you'd have kids come behind the ropes and touch Spaceship One and be next to it. During the space flights, a bunch of buses were rented and picked up the kids and brought them out to watch the historic space flights. And that was 14 years ago, and I'd like to think those same kids are now the engineers that are working on what's currently happening with SpaceX, Blue Origin, Bigelow, Stratollaunch. I mean, these are all amazing programs. I guess we have time. You want to? It'd be interesting to see Spaceship One fly again. Anybody want to see Spaceship One fly again? Yeah. This is the economy version. Oops. She's trying to do a roll. Oh well. Need some trimming, I think. Oh well. My best feather imitation here. There you go.
That's the first for QCon. So Dan and Julian will be doing a book signing right after this. If you want to get a book, you can. And then there's also an AMA session. So if you want to ask Dan or Julian any questions about Spaceship One, they'll be available to do it after that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.